A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You ever try to explain something complex to a 5-year-old and realize halfway through that your brain is just cycling through synonyms that are somehow even more confusing? It is like a linguistic trap where the harder you try to be simple, the more academic you sound. You start off trying to explain how a rainbow works, and 30 seconds later you are accidentally using words like refraction and visible spectrum, and the kid is just staring at you like you are speaking ancient Greek.
It is the ultimate test of functional understanding. There is that famous idea often attributed to Richard Feynman that if you cannot explain something to a child, you do not truly understand it yourself. But from a technical perspective, it is actually a very difficult optimization problem. It is not just about knowing the subject, it is about knowing the limits of the processor on the other end.
We are diving deep into that today. Daniel's prompt is asking us to look at the linguistic and algorithmic frameworks used to calibrate children's content. We are moving beyond the gut feeling of what sounds kid-friendly and looking at how we actually measure reading levels and vocabulary density. This is the science of the Goldilocks problem. If a text is too simple, the brain disengages because there is no challenge. If it is too complex, the cognitive load becomes too high and the reader drops off. Finding that middle ground is not just an art, it is a measurable science.
I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have spent way too much time looking at the math behind this. Most people think writing for children is just about subtracting complexity, but in reality it is about intentional re-architecting. In the modern media environment, we have shifted from the era of editors just having a feel for it to this data-driven landscape, where every syllable is scrutinized by an algorithm before it ever hits a screen or a page.
Before we get into the heavy algorithms, let us establish the taxonomy. When we talk about reading levels, we are usually hearing terms like Lexile or Flesch-Kincaid or ATOS. What is actually happening under the hood when a computer assigns a grade level to a paragraph? Is it actually reading the story, or is it just doing math?
It is almost entirely math. Most of these traditional formulas are surprisingly simple, which is both their strength and their biggest weakness. Take the Flesch-Kincaid grade level formula, for example. It was actually developed for the United States Navy back in 1975. They needed a way to ensure their technical manuals were readable by recruits who might only have a high school education. It relies on two main variables, average sentence length and average number of syllables per word.
Wait, so it is just a proxy? The computer is not actually thinking about the concepts. It is just counting the bumps on the words and the distance between the periods?
That is exactly it. The formula assumes that longer sentences are syntactically more complex and that words with more syllables are semantically more difficult. It is a mathematical heuristic. If you have a sentence with 30 words and 5 of those words have 4 syllables, the formula is going to flag that as a high school or college reading level, regardless of what the sentence actually says. You could write a perfectly logical sentence about quantum physics using short words, and the formula might tell you it is for a 3rd grader. Conversely, you could write a nonsensical sentence with long words, and it would tell you it is for a PhD candidate.
That seems like it could be easily gamed. I could write a totally nonsensical sentence with short words, and the formula would tell me it is perfect for a 1st grader. But that brings up a huge distinction you mentioned earlier, decodability versus comprehensibility.
Decodability is about phonics. Can the child look at the letters and turn them into sounds? Short, one-syllable words are easier to decode because they usually follow standard phonetic rules. But comprehensibility is about the internal model the child is building. You could have a very short sentence like, "The debt was void," which a first grader can read aloud perfectly, but they have no idea what it means because the concept of debt or a voided contract is outside their life experience. The formula sees three one-syllable words and says, "Great, this is for a 6-year-old." The reality is that the 6-year-old is lost.
So if Flesch-Kincaid is the old school Navy method, what is the Lexile framework doing differently? I see Lexile scores on almost every children's book in the library these days. It feels like the industry standard.
Lexile is a bit more sophisticated because it uses a proprietary scale developed by Metametrics. It still looks at sentence length, but it also looks at word frequency. Instead of just counting syllables, it compares the words in a text against a massive corpus of billions of words to see how common they are. The idea is that if a word appears frequently in general literature, a child is more likely to have encountered it. It provides a more granular score, often ranging from below 0 for beginning readers up to over 1600 for advanced technical text. It is trying to measure the semantic demand of the vocabulary rather than just the length of the words.
It sounds like we are trying to map the terrain of a child's mind using these metrics. But I want to talk about the vocabulary trap. You mentioned word frequency. There are these famous lists, like the Dolch list or the Fry word list, which are basically the high-frequency words that make up the vast majority of children's reading. If you are a writer, are you just supposed to stick to those like a restricted menu?
It is a necessary foundation, but it is insufficient for narrative flow. If you only use the top 100 words, your writing becomes incredibly repetitive and dull. The trick is how you introduce the Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. This is a framework developed by Isabel Beck. Tier 1 words are your basic conversational words like clock, baby, or happy. Tier 2 words are high-utility academic words like analyze, contrast, or predict. Tier 3 words are domain-specific like photosynthesis or isosceles. A good writer for children uses the Tier 1 words as the scaffolding to explain the Tier 2 and Tier 3 concepts.
I remember we touched on this a bit back in episode 1179 when we talked about the architecture of childhood and writing for young minds. The idea was that you can use complex concepts if the sentence structure provides enough support. But how does that work technically? If I am writing a script for an educational show, how do I use syntactic complexity analysis to adjust my draft for a specific age bracket?
You have to look at the branching factor of your sentences. In linguistics, we talk about clausal density. If you have a lot of dependent clauses sentences that start with because, although, or while, you are asking the child to hold one thought in their working memory while the sentence develops a second thought. For a 7-year-old, that working memory is still developing. If you want to drop the reading level without losing the meaning, you often just need to break those compound sentences into two simple ones. Instead of saying, "The rocket launched because the fuel ignited," you say, "The fuel ignited. Then the rocket launched."
It is like reducing the RAM requirements for the brain to process the data string. I love that. Let us look at a case study. If we take a simple plot point, say, a character finding a hidden map, how does that look when it is rewritten for a 2nd grade Lexile level versus a 5th grade level?
Okay, let us try it. A 2nd grade version might be, Leo looked under the bed. He found an old paper. It was a map. The map showed a big tree. Leo was excited. He wanted to find the treasure. Notice the short declarative sentences. Subject, verb, object. Very little branching.
And the 5th grade version?
The 5th grade version would look like this. While searching beneath his dusty bed frame, Leo discovered a yellowed, crinkled parchment. As he smoothed it out, he realized it was an intricate map leading to an ancient oak tree. A surge of excitement rushed through him, fueling his determination to uncover the long-lost treasure.
The difference is massive. In the 2nd version, you have introductory phrases like, while searching beneath his dusty bed frame. You have descriptive adjectives like intricate and ancient. You have complex emotional states like a surge of excitement fueling determination. The information density is much higher.
And the 5th grade version requires the reader to track the relationship between the action of smoothing the paper and the realization of what it is. That is a higher cognitive load. But here is the catch. If you give that 5th grade version to a 2nd grader who is obsessed with pirates and maps, they might actually understand it better than a generic 2nd grade text about something they do not care about. This is what we call the background knowledge effect.
That brings us to the precision fallacy. If a publisher tells me they need a book at a second grade level, how precise can I actually be? Is there a hard ceiling where a single 3-syllable word ruins the whole thing?
That is exactly the problem. A grade level is not a hard ceiling, it is a statistical probability. It means that a child at that grade level has a 75% probability of comprehending the text without becoming frustrated. It is a soft guideline. In fact, if you target a level too precisely, you might actually be doing the child a disservice. We know from research that children often make the most progress when they are reading at their instructional level, which is just slightly above what they can do independently. They need that bit of friction to grow. If you remove all the friction, you remove the learning.
So the goal is not total ease, it is manageable friction. That is a great way to put it. Let us talk about the tools though, because most writers are not doing long-form division on their syllable counts. If Daniel or anyone else is working on this, what are the actual NLP libraries or software they should be looking at in 2026?
If you are a developer or a data nerdy writer, the Natural Language Toolkit, or NLTK, and Spacie are still the industry standards for Python. They have built-in functions for calculating these scores. There is a library called TextStat that is fantastic. You can feed it a string of text, and it will return the Flesch-Kincaid grade, the Gunning Fog Index, the SMOG Index, and the Dale-Chow Readability Score all at once. The Gunning Fog Index is interesting because it specifically looks at complex words with 3 or more syllables, and uses that to estimate the years of formal education needed to read the text on the first try.
I have seen some of these tools flag specific words too. Like, it will highlight a word and say, consider replacing this with a simpler alternative. But, as we discussed, sometimes the complex word is the right word.
Right, and that is where it gets interesting with modern large language models. We are seeing a massive shift in how this calibration happens. Before, you had to manually find a synonym. Now, you can use a model like Claude or Gemini and give it a very specific prompt. You can say, rewrite this technical explanation of orbital mechanics for a 4th grade reading level, ensuring the Lexile score stays between 600 and 800, and maintain a sense of wonder.
And does it work? Or does it just make the AI sound like it is talking down to you?
It is remarkably effective if you understand the constraints. The large language models are actually better at this than traditional formulas because they understand context. A formula might flag the word dinosaur as difficult because it has 3 syllables. But an AI knows that every 4-year-old knows what a dinosaur is. The AI can maintain the tone and the intent while simplifying the syntax. We are moving toward a world of re-leveling where you can take a single piece of content and dynamically adjust it for different audiences.
That has huge implications for accessibility. Imagine a news website where you can toggle the reading level. If you are an English language learner or a student, you get the same facts but with a linguistic structure that fits your current capability. But I wonder about the trade-off. If we are constantly leveling everything down, do we lose the beauty of the language?
That is the big debate. If you look at the history of children's literature, some of the most beloved books actually have quite high reading levels. The Hobbit, for example, is often rated at an 8th or 9th grade level, yet many children read it much earlier. Why? Because the engagement and the background knowledge carry them through. If a kid is obsessed with dragons, they will fight through a complex sentence to find out what happens to the dragon. This is why targeting a specific grade level can be a false sense of security. If the content is boring, the reading level does not matter.
It makes me think of the vocabulary myth we discussed in episode 1056. We often assume that a bigger vocabulary equals better thinking, but often it is just more noise. In children's content, the goal is clarity. But I want to go back to the technical side of precision. If I'm building an app for kids, can I use this data in real time?
Imagine a hypothetical educational app that tracks a child's reading speed and comprehension. If the algorithm sees that the child is struggling with a specific paragraph, maybe they are rereading lines or spending too long on a word, the system could dynamically swap out the next paragraph for a leveled down version. It is like dynamic difficulty adjustment in video games, but for literacy. This is the future of personalized learning. We are moving away from static text and toward fluid text that adapts to the reader.
That is incredible, but it also sounds like a lot of work for the content creators. Do they have to write 5 versions of every story?
Not anymore. That is where the generative AI pipeline comes in. You write the master version at a high level, and then you use an automated pipeline to generate the calibrated versions. You still need a human in the loop to check for hallucinations or to make sure the soul of the story is still there, but the heavy lifting of syntactic simplification is now an algorithmic task. You can generate a version for a 2nd grader, a 5th grader, and an adult in seconds.
It is funny you mention the human in the loop. I think about someone like Daniel, who works in tech communications and AI. He probably sees this as a massive efficiency gain. But as a parent, I also think about how my son Ezra is going to learn. You do not want a system that is so perfectly calibrated that he never encounters a word he does not know.
The goal of calibration should be to provide a ladder, not a flat floor. You want the child to be constantly reaching. One of the best ways to do this is through what we call scaffolded vocabulary. You use a difficult word, but you immediately follow it with a context clue or a definition embedded in the narrative. For example, the cave was gargantuan. It was so big that a whole forest could fit inside. You have introduced a 4-syllable word, but you have given the child the key to unlock it right there in the sentence.
That gargantuan example is perfect because it shows that children actually love tasty words. They like the way big words feel in their mouths. It is the sentence structure that usually trips them up, not the words themselves. Let us pivot to some practical takeaways for someone who is actually sitting down to write or audit a script right now. What is the first thing they should do?
The first step is to use a multi-tool approach. Do not just trust one metric. Run your text through a Flesch-Kincaid parser, but also check it against a frequency list like the Dale-Chow list. If a word is flagged as difficult, ask yourself if it is a flavor word or a functional word. If it is flavor-like using crimson instead of red, keep it if it adds to the story. If it is functional, and it is making a key instruction harder to understand, swap it out.
And what about the read aloud test? We are a podcast, so we know how much the ear differs from the eye.
That is actually my favorite low-tech tool. Read your script out loud. If you run out of breath before the end of a sentence, it is too long for a child to process. Audio cadence reveals complexity that formulas often miss. Children's brains process spoken language differently than written language, and often a complex word is easier to understand when it is heard in a natural, emotive tone than when it is seen on a page. The prosody of the voice provides its own kind of context. You can hear the importance of a word by how the narrator says it.
That is a great point. Prioritizing conceptual clarity over word simplicity is key. You can use a big word if the concept is clear, but if the concept itself is muddy, no amount of simple words will fix it.
Precisely. Ambiguity is the enemy, not complexity. If you are writing for kids, you have to be incredibly precise with your logic. You cannot skip steps in a sequence. You cannot assume they know the unspoken rules of a situation. That is where the real work of writing for children happens. It is not just about the words, it is about the architecture of the ideas.
So, if we are looking at the future of this, where does it go? We have moved from the Navy's 1975 manuals to real-time AI re-leveling. What is the next step?
I think we are heading toward personalized linguistic profiles. Right now, we target 2nd grade, but every 2nd grader is different. One might have a massive vocabulary but struggle with long sentences. Another might be a decoding wizard but have very little background knowledge of history or science. In the future, content will not be leveled to a grade, it will be leveled to a person. Your e-reader or your media player will know your specific linguistic boundaries and will subtly adjust the content to keep you in that flow state of perfect challenge.
It is like a bespoke suit for your brain. It sounds amazing, but also a little bit like we are living in a sci-fi novel. But I suppose that is what this show is all about. We are looking at the weird ways technology intersects with the most human things, like telling a story to a child.
And it is important to remember that complexity is not the enemy of learning. Ambiguity is. You can have a complex story with simple language, and you can have a simple story with unnecessarily complex language. Our job as creators is to remove the mechanical friction so the ideas can get through. Whether you are using a 1975 formula or a 2026 AI, the goal is the same: connection.
Well, I think we have covered the mechanical friction of this topic pretty thoroughly. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure we give some love to the people who make this show happen. Huge thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power our research and the generation of these scripts. It is the tech that allows us to dive into these deep pools of data and come back with something useful.
If you found this dive into reading levels useful, you should definitely check out episode 1179 on the architecture of childhood. It covers the developmental side of things that we touched on today. You can find that and our entire archive at myweirdprompts.com.
Or just search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram to get notified whenever we drop a new episode. We are always exploring something new, from the math of linguistics to the ethics of AI.
Today it was linguistic frameworks. Tomorrow it might be something even weirder. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.
See you then.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weirding.